Hey folks, Jason Duke's Dirt Race Life. In our last video where we ran the Camaro, we picked up the win. Had a great night, was super happy with how everything turned out. But the car was a little bit tight, and if I'd have had to work in very thick traffic, I would have had some trouble. The next race for this car is a crate racing street stock 3000 to win. That is definitely a class above what this car is built to, and it's going to be some really tough competition. We want this car to be freed up a little bit more and able to work in really heavy traffic so that we can be there at the end. This video is all about us putting this car back on the scales, reviewing where we're at and making minor adjustments so that we can get the best car possible to take to that next race. Y'all stick around. Important note before I get started, I'm going to link in this video my scaling and setup video that I did on this car back at the beginning of this season. The numbers that are on the board in that video, when you review them, springs, the shocks, everything like that, that's what this car is running currently. I haven't made, the only changes I've made to the car have been just minor changes as far as weight ballasts and the left rear bite in the car, and then just swapping the tires around back and forth between H500s and 10-inch wide asphalt pull-offs. But definitely want to go and check that video out if you haven't, or if you have in the past, you may want to refer back to it. That way when we get to the scales in this video, you can compare and see, because there have been minor changes along the way, but they are very minor. Several questions where people were asking about the scales as I was using. And I was going to show these. I've been using these scales for the last about 5 years. These are about 5 years old. These are Proform. They were the least expensive scales that we could afford. It is really important for you to have scales for your car. It just is. And it's one of, so it's like the first thing that's the most important is your safety equipment. But number two, that you need scales, or you need to have access to scales on a regular basis. And I raced for years without scales, and I realized that just how much that was handicapping me. And I'll tell you, the scales, putting the car on scales on a regular schedule, like rescaling your car periodically, as you're changing things, then when you read those scales numbers, it will teach you about what your setup changes are actually doing to the car. So if you're not going back to scales, or if you're having to, like at the start of the season, you're just going to somebody else's shop to get on the scales one time, you miss that. And so it's kind of like you're throwing darts at a dartboard with a blindfold on during the years you make changes. That's why I believe scales are so critical. These were one of the only sets that I found that was less than $1,000. They just run on AA batteries, and I'll put a link in the description to these. They still sell these. I'm not going to say that they're the best quality. They are not a sponsor in any way or anything like that. I got these through one of the major distributors online. But it's a small, simple scale pad, 2 inches thick. It's like 8 inches by 14 inches. But it works fine with me with asphalt pull-offs or H500s. But because it is a little bit smaller scale, I like it as far as me like putting them in the case and carrying it around. It's a smaller package, and I don't have to have like a big roll-around cart for it. But at the same time, they do have to be exactly in the right spot when you sit the car down on to the scale pads, and you better have the car in gear or well scotched, because small pad, you get the tire on the edge of it, and it rolls off really easy. But other than that, I've been very happy with them. Let's get her up. Alright, so we're going to set the air pressure on the car to exactly what we expect to run it at for the next feature race, because that's where we want our scales, what the feature is going to be. And for that, I'm going to set this left front to 17 pounds of air. I'm going to set this left rear to 14 pounds of air. I set this right rear to 17 pounds of air. And I set this right front to 21 pounds of air. So I'm running 17, 14, 17, 21. In my opinion, these are the lowest air pressures that I like to run my H500 tires at. Below this air pressure, I feel like the tires will start cupping, which is where the sidewall is folding under, making the center of the tire lose contact with the track. These are what I consider my minimums. Now that I know my air is set correct, we're going to turn our scales on and we're going to zero them out. And we're going to use the tare feature. Now, the tare feature is typically on all the scales, you're going to see it's a T-A-R-E. And what that is that's a button that sets everything to zero. Your scales may be at zero, but you should still go through the process of using the tare. And the reason being is what it's doing is it's telling the scales computer that whatever readings it is getting off of the scales at that moment, make that the new baseline for zero. Okay, so you could be, you're going to have slight readings on all of the scales, but it may not be enough to register a pound or register a point of a percentage or something like that. Regardless, you should always tare your scales before you start. That's with nothing sitting on your scales. So tires aren't on it. So I've got them zeroed, everything's reading zero on the scales, and my air pressures are set on the car. These are the tires. If we do any tire switching, we're going to run these stagger setup on the car. And I've got 3 inches of stagger in the back. I've got 1 inch of stagger in the front is what this car is at right now. That's what we're planning to run in the feature. And so now we're going to sit the car down on the scales. Now, an important note here. I'm up on a lift that's going to sit the car down evenly. But before I had this, and this is an older style floor lift, but before I had this lift, I would use 3 jacks. 2 in the front on the horns and 1 in the back under the rear end, and I would let them down in increments to do it evenly. The reason for that is because if you let down one side and then the other, and create this cornering effect on it, then you're going to make that tire bind in to your scale, and you may be able to rock and bounce the car enough to get that to level out. But, that's, who knows, maybe, maybe not. So you could be creating a false reading by doing that. So if you are using jacks, try to at a minimum, do the back together and then do the front as 2 jacks, or after you get the back on, 1 jack in the center, under the center of the cross member in the front to let the front down evenly. What you don't want is the car to be angled side to side or anything like that when you're sitting it down on the jacks. Definitely going to create a bind doing that. Going to throw your scale numbers off. Okay, so we're down on the scales. All right, we're in the middle of them. My tire contact patches are in the center of all of these scales everywhere, so everything looks fine. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bounce the car. I'm going to give it a pretty hard bounce. I want to make sure that I don't have any bushing or anything, a wrinkle in the tire or anything. I want to make sure that I don't have anything binding up on the scale. So give it a chance to settle. I'm going to jump in the car and record the numbers, and then we'll put them on a dry erase board where we can look at them together. Let's put these numbers on the board where we can review them together. Can y'all see that? Yeah, y'all can see that. All right. So, of course, left front, right front, left rear, right rear. Here we go. So 776 and 25.3%, and then 668 and 21.8%, 882 and 28.8, 24.8%, and 740, and that's 24.1%. Okay, so let's do the math on this right quick. Our left percentage is 25 and 28 is 53 and 3 and 8, 54.1. All right, so 54.1% left. I like 54% left. The more rear you run, in my opinion, the more rear you run, the more left you need. So that's my left. My rear percentage is 28.8 and 24.1, so 28 and 24 is 52. That's 52.9. Okay, and so I like 53 to 54%. I'm on the low end of that because I've got the car down with a total weight of 3,067 pounds. I'd be at 54% if I had the car up at 3,200 pounds. The way I was running my last race, I was running by the rules for Arkansas factory stocks. That was the rule set that I was running at the race. I had to weigh 3,000 pounds. So the reason that I am 3,067 pounds is because it is more important for your car to scale correctly than it is to be as light as possible. And I don't think I'm going to change weight for this next race, even though this crate racing class that I'm running in next, that's a 3,000 pound rule for me because it's not a crate motor. Crate motors would be 2,800. Open motors on a 2-barrel are 3,000. So I mean, I technically could weigh less, but we don't want to mess with this setup. Again, it's more important that the car drive right than it be at its minimum weight. All right, so our left rear bite. So left rear bite, let's see. And that is the difference. So left rear bite is the amount that the left rear weighs more than the right rear. So let's see, 740 from 882 is 142 pounds. Now, I had the car on the scales and it was around 150, but I'm down just a little bit on fuel from where I was when I scaled that. And I left the car, I had filled the car up, okay, so I was within an inch of the top of my fuel tank, and I had run 20 laps. All right, and so that's where my fuel's currently at with this car scaled. That makes perfect sense to me because when I scaled it last time, I was like 3,079 or 82 pounds or something like that. And so now I'm a little less weight. So that's all adding up for me. But that's okay because in this next race, I suspect that they're going to go 20, 30 or more laps. It's 3,000 to win, so there's probably going to be a lot of laps involved. So I don't want to put the fuel back in the car and then be very different from what I'm going to end up with. So I'm going to leave the fuel down like it is. Now, this bite's at 142 pounds. When I drove the car, I'll link that race. I mentioned that the car was a little bit tight, but I didn't want to mess with it. I felt like it was going to come to me. It did. The track really got a lot slicker, and it did help me quite a bit, but on my entries, when you're watching that video, on my entries, I had to make sure that I entered in smooth, and there was once or twice where that I had to cut short or I missed it on my entry, and I had a little bit of push into entering the turn. Now, another thing that the camera doesn't show but that was going on in that race was I was running about 3 to 4 rounds out from the center toward the rear brakes, but I was on a full dry slick track, and I really expected to be somewhere around neutral at that point, but I wasn't. And the reason I wasn't is because when I was braking entering into the turn, I was smoothly braking, but as I would reach the center of entry, I was aggressively stepping further into the brakes and causing my rear end to make a shift. And the reason I was doing that was because the car was not naturally turning as well as I wanted it to. So it didn't fall over to the left quite as easy as I felt that it should. It was working fine for the race. However, there had been a late caution, and my tires, it was a long caution, and then my tires had completely cooled off. It's like we had went green for like 10 or 12 laps. The tires had started firing off. Then the caution came. The tires, got cold, got hard. And so when we went back to green, I had people knocking on my back door at that point. The reason they were is because I was stepping in and I was causing my rear end to skate a little bit by stepping down aggressively on the brake right at the finish of the entry part of the turn. The car was still rotating over, it was getting down on the nose, but the car was just a little bit tighter than it needed to be. And so when those tires cooled off and got hard, that made that situation worse. For that reason, we're going to take and loosen our car up just a little more on entry. How are we going to do that? We're going to increase our left rear bite. Increasing the left rear bite on the car will affect entry and exit. It affects entry because it makes the left rear tire weigh even more than the right rear. When you are decelerating, these tires are dragging against the track. So when they're dragging against the track trying to hold the car back, the more one of them weighs than the other, the more it's going to turn the car toward the tire that's dragging more. That's how it makes the car turn into the left by having more left rear bite on the car when you brake. That effect is increased as you run rear brake bias out. That's one of the reasons that me knowing I was running more rear brake bias on a dry track than I expected to was telling me I was having to make those rear tires respond more than I should have had to. In other words, if I had a more balance with all four tires braking me down on this slick track, I could have stayed hooked to the track, but I didn't have enough left rear for that to happen. I was having to put more of that brake on the rear to get that response I was looking for. I hope that makes sense. So left rear on entry, that's how when you're dragging the car down, slowing the car down, the one that's got more weight on it, it's going to turn the car in that direction. Then on acceleration, exiting the turn, when you step on the throttle, you're pushing the car forward with your tires. Because you're pushing the car forward, the tire that has more traction by having more weight on it, it's going to push harder and get more grip on the track and turn the car opposite away from that tire. So more left rear bite also has the effect of making the car push out on exit. The trade-off here is that you can balance that. One of the ways you can balance that is by controlling stagger. If I have enough stagger in the car, I can push more with the left rear, but because the difference between the two tires, it's like that solo cup example, rolling in a circle. So if the car is wanting to turn left because the right rear tire is bigger, that compensates for the left tire pushing better against the track to push the car out. So you're striking a balance. For that reason, I know I have enough stagger in the car. On exit, in the last race when I was running 3 inches of stagger, I could fully accelerate off the turn and I could steer the car. So I could take and sweep the car out, or if I needed to, I could hold a straight line. That's an indication to me that I had good control over my car. I had good bite in my front tires. I could get the car to turn and go where I wanted. That means I definitely didn't have too much left rear on the car for exit, and additionally I had enough stagger to get middle off for that car to turn and come out. So I feel like I've got some room to be able to add some left rear bite to the car. How much? Well, in my experience, if you're wanting to see the car act differently, you need to be more than 10 pounds of difference on the left rear bite. More than 20, and I feel like that the car is going to start acting significantly different, and I may have to change other things. So my target is between 10 pounds more and 20 pounds more. I'm looking for a slight difference on entry without exaggerating that so much that I've caused my exit to become very different and start pushing out. So how are we going to do that? I'm going to look at the ride heights on the car. I believe we're just going to turn our front jack screws in order. I said jack screws. I have cups on the car currently. I don't have jack screws in this car. It just has weight cups. Correction there. But we're going to turn those cups and we're going to see if we can put, let's shoot for 15 pounds into this left rear additional without upsetting significantly our ride heights. So let's do that. So I'm going to record these ride heights. The scales don't cause a problem. They just add 2 inches to it, so I subtract that out of the number when I measure it. Of course, check out the linked video that shows details under the car of the exact points and how I measure. For the purposes of this video, we're just going to write them down on the board since we've already covered that. Okay, so we got our ride heights wrote down here. Important point, when you look at the past setups, keep in mind, we set the car up on asphalt pull-offs. Those tires were significantly shorter. So like all of the ride heights were 1 inch shorter in our last setup video than in this one, because this is on H500s. Another point here about the ride heights is I take my front ride heights on the bolt in the front of the lower control arm where it goes through the frame, and then on the rear I measure the center of the bolt for the front eye of the Leaf. So it measures very flat, but that's about 2 inches of rake the way I measure that. What I'm coming up with is a car that is sitting over just a little bit onto the passenger side. That's on purpose because like on my front, I've got 9 3/8 on the left side, 9 1/4 on the right side. I have 9 1/4 on the left rear and 9 inches on the right rear. So the car is pitched over just a little bit on the passenger side. That's on purpose. I do not want my car to be leaned in on the driver's side. I'm trying to get my car to go over and onto the right front, over onto the right side, so that I can get that Leaf car to create some rear steer in that left. Let that left rear spring drop. Let that left rear go forward. Get that car to be able to pick that throttle up and get through that middle of that turn. So that is on purpose. Now we're wanting to add, 15 pounds is our target, between 10 and 20 of bite to the car. And in order to do that, on the rear, I'm not going to move shackle holes because I'm already running 1 more inch of shackle on the left rear than the right rear. And so I don't want to go to 2 inches. I have 1 inch spaced holes. I do not want to go to 2 inches. It would do it. The problem I'll run into there is I'll start running into Leaf angle bind. So as I start distorting the difference between the 2 leaves, my pads on my rear end are at the same angle, and so that creates a bind in between the leaves that is binding your rate for your leaf spring. So that's a bad thing. 1 inch I'm totally fine with on the end. 2 inches I'm not fine with. I'm going to turn the cups on the front of the car, so I have traditional weight cups with 9 1/2 inch springs on them. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a 1/2 round out of my left front. I am going to put a 1/2 round in my right front. By doing that, I have decreased the amount of spring pressure on my left front. I have increased the amount of spring pressure on my right front. It is going to change the pitch of the car, so it's going to flatten the car out some. But it's also going to keep my front ride height the same while increasing that left rear bite. Again, if I push down more on my right front, that's making me push down more on my left rear. If I push down less on my left front, that's making me push down less on my right rear. And so for that reason, I can maintain the same ride height on the front. That's important because I'm running a soft 800-pound spring on the right front. I have a shock through the center of the cup, so I don't have a bump on it. I don't want my lower control arm to hit against my frame. The second a lower control arm contacts with the frame, you'll lose all contact ability with that right front tire. You'll shear out and you'll push. Because when the frame and the lower control arm contact with each other, the weight loading on that tire will go infinite. So it'll just instantly break loose on the track when that happens. You've got no suspension. And so I want to keep that ride height where it was. So let's make that change. Let me show you how this left front, when I talk about adjusting these cups. So These are cups, so they're difficult to adjust. But what I do, and every track I race at, rule-wise, techs don't have a problem with this, I put slots across here in this actual cup adjustment right here, and then I've cut this frame open right here. And so the reason that I do that is because, for one thing, I can run an outboard shop through here if I want to, and I've got mounts for outboards according to the class if I'm wanting to run them. I don't run them anymore on this car. I run, as you can see, I got my Bilstein in here. But these slots right here allow me to make an adjustment on this cup without having to completely disassemble everything. So I'm going to put this half a round in on this side, and then the right side is built the exact same way with these slots around it, and take, you know, so I can take a half a round out of this left side using these slots like this, and then put a half a round in the right side using these slots. So real simple. It doesn't turn easy. I mean, you have to use a crowbar. But it does turn. Of course, if I take the shock and everything loose and let all this drop down, of course it will turn easy. But I have made adjustments at the track using this process before when I found myself in a jam. I was about out of adjustment on the right side, so I ended up adding a quarter to the right front and taking 3/4 of an inch out of the left front. So that's going to drop the rear end, I mean the front end, just a bit, but I was at my limit, so that's where I am. Again, we don't sugarcoat anything. Nothing's perfect in racing. You're just looking for the best solution to fit. So let's see. Oh, give her a good shake there. Set it back down on the jack stick, on the weights. Alright, let's see where we're at, y'all. Alright, so we've got our new numbers, so let's make the comparison. Alright, we went from 776 to 773, which is now 25.2% on the left front. On the right front, we went from 668 to 672, and so now that is 21.9%. Alright, on the left rear, we went from 882 to 890. So now we're at 890, which is 29%. And on the right rear, we went from 740 to 732, which is now 23.9% of our total weight. All right? And so when we look at these numbers, our left percentage should be the same. It may move just because of settling and stuff, the rounding as far as, but if it moves more than a tenth, then I've got something wrong. But let's see, the left percent, 29 and 25.2 is 54.1. So, let me see, 29, 54.2, okay? And so that's probably just rounding error. It was probably close, so 54.2%. It shouldn't change. The only thing that would change is the cross. And then the rear percentage was 52.9. Now I'm 29 and 23.9, so I'm still 52.9. So that didn't change. And I wouldn't expect these, like I said, to change. So, because when you change jacks, you're not changing left or rear, you're only changing cross. I don't pay attention to the cross itself, just the left rear bite, which is a factor of cross. All right, so 52.9. And then the cross went from 142 pounds to, let's see, 732. From 890 is, let's see, be 160 minus 2, 158 pounds. So we have increased our left rear bite. Oh, that's nice. So we went from 142 to 158. So we've increased our left rear bite by 16 pounds by roughly changing our cups on the front one turn in total, is the way that worked out. Now, an important point here, the one turn of a cup depends on the machined lands in the actual threads themselves, you know, how steep that is, obviously, and then also the rate of the spring. So like I'm running a 900 spring on the left front and 800 spring on the right front, and those are fairly soft springs. So I may turn my cups more in order to get that change than someone who is running, say, 1,000 and 1,100. One turn on the cups for springs that are another 200 or 300 pounds stronger than mine may result in 20 pounds or 25 pounds of difference in bite. So just keep that in mind. It's specific to the car. The direction of the change and the tactics we're using are the same, but the individual results, will depend on the setup of the car that you have. So I got 16 pounds of bite. Now the only other thing that I'm interested in, and really it's just for information for me to document where I'm currently at, is where are my ride heights now. So I'm going to grab those right quick and then we'll put them on the board. Alright, so I got them recorded here. It did change them slightly. So on the left front, I went from 9 3/8 down to 9 1/4. And then on the right front, I went from 9 1/4, and look, it stayed the same. There may have been a difference of a 1/16. It's difficult for me to measure at that level. So I wrote it down as 9 1/4. Then on the left rear, it appeared to stay the same on the left rear, 9 1/4 to 9 1/4. But on the right rear, it looked like my right rear raised just a little bit from 9 to 9 1/8. It appears that by turning down on the left front cup 3/4 of a turn and up on the right front cup 1/4 of a turn, I've dropped 1/8 of an inch out of my left front. My right front has pretty well stayed the same. By doing that, I took a little pressure off of my right rear, and so my right rear raised up 1/8 of an inch. So you see just a very minor change here because of it that's directly related to which cups I moved. So overall, my ride height in the front, I've lost an 1/8 inch of ride height across the front of the car is all. I'm fine with that. I needed that little bit extra bite, that 16 extra pounds. I feel like that's going to put me right in the zone where I need to be to make my car more drivable. I expect to have a full field of 24 cars. Again, it's crate racing street stock, so I'm punching above my weight class, but I'm not scared to try to punch above my weight class. That's how you find out just how good you are, when you stack yourself up against the really tough competition. And so I think we're as good as we can be for this car to take it to that race. And that's what you should strive for. Whatever is within your control, try to make it the best it can be. Don't leave doubt in your mind about what you could have done. And so that's what this is all about. If you like this content and it's helpful, smash that like button. Leave me a comment. Those comments is what's driving me to go back and give you some more information about scaling. If you love what's going on here, look at my join for the membership. Chase D's, he just recently joined as a member. I appreciate that, Chase. I will not let you down on making content that you can find useful. Thank y'all.